What's going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and oh boy, we are here to somehow talk about AEW All Out 2024 live from Chicago, Illinois. AEW on pay-per-view again 2 weeks after All In at Wembley. A great show, very emotional show, very powerful show. Tonight, a very violent show, a very bloody show, a very disturbing show, and just a very insane pro wrestling event. And it is very weird to now be in this position to talk about it because of many of the things that happened on this show. It's hard to talk about how Will Osprey and Pac had this fantastic wrestling match, or Okada was wrestling with Konosuke Takeshita and they were exchanging moves back and forth, and I can't wait to see a match between the two of them, or this trios match happened on the pre-show. It's hard to discuss all that stuff in the same serious vein as talking about how we had an opening match where the focus was two men trying to literally break each other's necks. We had a Chicago street fight between two women who were doing everything to brutalize each other. We had attempted murder with Jon Moxley and Bryan Danielson. And we had potentially flat out murder in the main event between Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland. So this show was all over the place. I want to say top to bottom, overall, it was a good show. I would like to be able to say that. There was a lot of really good matches on this show, some really good moments, some strong action. You know, before I say anything, let me just kudos, respect, all that to everybody who wrestled on this show, particularly the certain people who are in certain positions on this show. I'll just flat out say it. The two men in the main event, Hangman and Swerve, they had a mission, they had a goal, and in my opinion, mission accomplished. And my heart goes out to the two of them. My complete respect goes out to the two of them for what they did in that main event. I didn't ask them to do it, but they did it, and the people in that building were up for it. You look online and see a lot of the reaction. It's divided for sure, but you see a lot of people who definitely appreciated what they saw. And, you know, I give them credit for all of the hell that they put themselves through in that match. My hat goes off to everybody, but in particular, those two, because I don't even know how to describe that match, which sounds like deja vu because I'm pretty sure I said something similar last year when they had their Texas death match at Full Gear. I didn't really know what to make of that match either. And yet I continued to place it on my top 20 favorite matches of the year because it was. Now this year, I would feel guilty for doing that with this steel cage match, this lights out, non-sanctioned steel cage match. Because, and we'll get into it, but wow. So let's try to rewind here and go through most of this show in some kind of order, because honestly, I don't really know how to, you know what? No, screw that. We'll go ahead and get to that right now because I don't really want to wait for it. We'll talk about Swerve and Hangman because these two had a steel cage match, lights out, unsanctioned. You know the story. You know the build-up between these two. It's been going on for almost a full year now. It started at Wrestle Dream last year, where it was simply about establishing one's status and spot on the roster, and it's turned into this blood feud, one of the best feuds in AEW history. If someone would say it's the best, I would not argue against them. It's very hard to argue against it. But coming into this match, we know the last image of Dynamite heading into it was Hangman burning down Swerve's childhood home. Of course, after Swerve broke into Hangman's home last year. Now, while that was bad, I don't think the appropriate response to that is to burn down someone else's home. But, it is what it is. This is wrestling, people. This match here, it was a cage match, non-sanctioned. So you knew this was going to be violent. You knew this was going to be disturbing, but I still was not prepared for what happened here. You had some weapons. You had chairs and tables and all that stuff. Even that stuff. There was a certain point where Swerve was smashing Hangman in the back with a steel chair, and the sound of that chair, I know he was using like the lip of it, like the top part of the chair, which Taz on commentary even pointed out is the hardest part of that chair. The sound it was making over Hangman's back was just brutal. So, but you had regular wrestling items used, but you had this toolbox too. Prince Nana brought out a toolbox, so there was stuff in the toolbox, so you knew there was going to be some shit in that toolbox, and they wasted no time. They brought out the staple gun. Of course, we've seen Swerve with the staples before. It has no effect on him, but it does on Hangman, to the point where Swerve stapled some of the burnt up childhood pictures from Swerve's home, stapled them to Hangman's chest and his face. We had a cinder block at one point introduced, where both men got very much acquainted with this cinder block. I think it was Swerve who hit a vertebraker on Hangman onto this thing, and then later on, Hangman hit Swerve with a power bomb onto the cinder block. Also, gotta say, the power bomb was overused to all hell in this match. We had a power bomb onto the cinder block. Swerve power bombed Hangman into the cage wall. Hangman hit an awesome bomb at one point, an avalanche power bomb off the top. So that move was definitely overused in this match, and at no point did it finish anything. So you have all these weapons, you have all this plunder, you have the blood, both men are bleeding. It's brutal, it's uncomfortable, it's disturbing. But then Hangman starts to get frustrated with Swerve. He starts yelling at him, he starts hitting him with the chair, and he's telling him to beg. Swerve's laughing at him. He's done this before, he's laughed in his face. Here he's laughing again, but you can tell he don't got much energy left in him, and he collapses. So then Hangman goes over and pulls out a hypodermic needle. And, well, before that, he rips out Swerve's grill. So he takes the grill out of Swerve's mouth, and then he goes and gets a hypodermic needle. I know this was a hypodermic needle because the commentator said it was a hypodermic needle. So therefore, that's what it was. And he proceeded to inject whatever was in this needle into Swerve's mouth. Now, I don't think it was explicitly stated here, but just putting two and two together with the sequence of events that just happened here, which is crazy to even talk about. But my guess is the idea here was that by removing Swerve's grill out of his mouth and by injecting him with this needle into his mouth, his teeth were supposed to be numbed up. Therefore, what would happen after this would basically knock his teeth out of his mouth, which, from what we could see, did not happen, but it would be easy to believe that it could happen, because after the needle was used and tossed away, Hangman rears back with Swerve on his knees. Actually, the needle was not tossed away. I take that back. The needle was sticking out of Swerve's mouth. So that was quite the image for you. But with Swerve on his knees, Hangman rears back and he blasts Swerve in the head with this steel chair. One of the loudest steel chair shots I have ever heard in my life. I've been watching wrestling for so long, and I've heard some pretty wicked chair shots. Almost 25% of them were from The Undertaker. But, good God, the sound of this chair. Now, maybe this is going to start up a whole thing. Was it gimmicked up? Did they put the mics turned up at a certain point because they wanted to really highlight how loud it was, but really it wasn't all that big of a deal. It wasn't a real chair. It wouldn't have caused that much impact. I don't know. I don't care. It was gross. It was disgusting. And thank God it was the end of the match. The referee called for the bell. You could win by pinfall, submission, or knockout. This was the knockout blow. Hangman got the win. I will say, in terms of win-losses here, Hangman has yet to beat Swerve up to this point. And I find it tragically poetic that Hangman his only victory over Swerve is in a non-sanctioned match, where these matches typically do not count towards people's win-loss records. So Hangman's only recorded victory over Swerve is in a match where technically it didn't even count. Now, the records and the rankings and all that stuff does not matter anymore anyway, but just I found that to be fascinating, and I found that to be an interesting story to tell if Hangman were to win heading into this match, which he did win. But yeah, this match was crazy. I don't even really know if I liked it or not. It was as advertised. I can tell you that much. It was exactly what they promoted it as being, which was a violent, brutal steel cage match. No rules, no regulations. These two have wanted to brutalize and kill each other for over a year. And Hangman has been obsessed with destroying Swerve for as long as I can remember. And Swerve has had ammunition to want to go after him. He burned down his house a week ago. Swerve invaded Hangman's house, invaded his home. He stalked him and sat in a car watching as Hangman took his pregnant wife, to the hospital. So this feud has been insane. And with the way it's been built up, this is the kind of match that you would expect to come from it. It's also the kind of match that you would think would end this program. Now, I thought that about their Full Gear match last year too, and clearly that was not the end. But this right here, I mean, what else can you possibly do? Again, I said that a year ago, but looking at this, what else could possibly happen? And just even more so than the feud itself, how can either of these two men coexist? There's no brand splits in AEW, no official ones. I know they have a whole separate collision roster, but it's not like Raw and SmackDown and WWE where you can separate people. This is a full roster. How can these two men coexist on this roster after a match like this? What does this mean for Hangman? What does this mean for Swerve? Is Swerve... I mean, you don't end a match like that without thinking that he might not be around for a little bit. So what's going to happen for him in his future? Hangman here, he got the biggest win in years for himself. What's going to be his fate? This was an insane match. There's already, I'm sure you can see it, there's already divided opinion on it, ranging from people praising it and saying how beautifully violent it was and how incredible it was and it's the greatest match of all time, blah, blah, blah. Other people saying they hated it. They were disgusted by it. It was disgusting. It was embarrassing to pro wrestling. It was not pro wrestling. It's the worst thing that could ever happen. AEW is going to go out of business. And this is not hyperbole. I've literally seen all of these takes and these posts on Twitter/X over the last couple of minutes before I started recording. That's almost in a row. That's what I've seen. So you can tell just based on my timeline, I'm sure other people's online discourses all over the place are very much down the middle with this match. There's very little room for any middle ground here. So, but I'm kind of in the middle ground. For what it was, I can't even really say I enjoyed it, but I respected it. I was captivated. I was engaged. I wanted to see it. I wanted it to end, granted, but I was very much eyes glued to the TV, the entire, computer screen in my case, but I was full attention on it. It caught my attention, it kept my attention, and it got visceral reactions out of me. And it is unlike anything I have ever seen before in a professional wrestling match. And to be honest, it is something I never want to see again. The chair shots to the head. AEW has been raked over the coals so many times in the past with these unprotected chair shots to the head. I don't know. They must know something that the rest of us don't. I don't know. I feel like, and there are people out there, of course, who don't care and they are just blindly violent. But again, I will take the hard stance. I don't care what my opinion of this match was. I will always take the stance that unprotected chair shots to the head, one person smashing another person over the head with a chair of any kind, of a weapon of any kind, directly on their head, with them not getting their arms or hands up at all. That happening in the year 2024 is unacceptable. I don't care how gimmicked the chair was. I don't care how fake it is. Unless that shit is made of plastic or is made of foam and you are just adding in sound effects, I don't care. There's just no excuse for it. They just did this at Blood and Guts a few months ago with Jack Perry getting blasted in the head with an unprotected chair shot. They got reamed over it there. And that was on TV. This is a big pay-per-view. This was the closing moment of a huge pay-per-view, and the whole match was hinging on it. And I will once again reiterate, I'm glad that it ended the match. But yeah, like that was the whole point here. And I just think there's no place for it anymore in wrestling. There's just too much known with concussions and CTE, all that stuff. And people can scoff at it and laugh at it, but it's real. It's legitimate, and there's just no place for it, in my opinion. But with that being said, the rest of this match was just brutal. It was disturbing. I'm going to throw all these words out there, a lot of big, fancy, pretty words that I'm sure a lot of other people are using to describe this match, but they're true. They're genuine. And this feud between Hangman and Swerve has been one of the most polarizing rivalries in history. It is truly one of the most engaging feuds in AEW's short history, and they reached a level of violence in this match that I personally have never truly seen on a mainstream scale like this, and honestly hope to never see again. So I don't know if I had a very definitive thought one way or another on it, but take all those thoughts that I just had over the last 17 minutes and combine them up, and that's my thoughts on this match. And with that, we gotta move on, because there was other stuff that happened on this show, including Bryan Danielson defending his World Heavyweight Championship against the TNT champion, the scapegoat, Jack Perry, in a match that, I'll be nice and say, was very technically sound. These guys were wrestling. Jack Perry came to wrestle. He was soaking in all the tremendous heat from the Chicago crowd. They hated him. Some liked him. Or at the very least, there was enough people in the crowd who were shouting and shutting down any CM Punk chants. So there was that. But Jack Perry, he was wrestling his ass off in this match, and he was hanging in there with Danielson. But for me, I was a little bored, and I just wasn't thoroughly entertained. I could appreciate what they were doing, their athleticism and everything there. It's not like they were doing anything wrong. They had a very good match. They worked well together. They did what they were supposed to do. It's just I personally was not entertained by it. I didn't really care when the interference came with the Bucks coming out there after the referee got bumped. The Bucks came out, but they were ran off by Claudio and Wheeler Yuta. They had their own match earlier in the night. I'll just go ahead and briefly mention it here because it was a nothing match. It was a regular standard tag team championship match. The Young Bucks won. They defeated Yuta and Claudio. It was a very good match, but we get very good matches every single week on TV, and there was nothing about this particular match that stood out all that much. It was made in the second to last segment on the Dynamite the week before, so there was no real story. There was nothing entertaining about the build-up to this match because the build-up was non-existent. But the match itself was fine, and the Bucks retained like I figured. Same thing here with this match between Jack Perry and Bryan Danielson. I think for me, and maybe a lot of other people, the biggest issue with this match is it was probably the most predictable match on the entire show. In that there was no way there was no way Bryan Danielson was going to lose this match. And he did not. The interference was waved away, and Jack Perry, they did what they could. Bryan, I give him credit, he did what he could to make Jack Perry look tough and look like a credible threat to him. It just did not work for me. And in the end, Jack Perry was put down with the Busaiku knee and pinned 1, 2, 3. Danielson retained the title. After the match is where the real story here kicks in. So Danielson gets attacked by Killswitch. I guess we're calling him Killswitch again, not Luchasaurus. But he did briefly come face to face with Jack Perry, which I thought was very interesting. But Killswitch was out there, so we knew where this was leading. Out walked Christian Cage, who had basically his contract, his Money in the Bank contract that he won in the Casino Gauntlet match at All In. We haven't seen him on TV since then, so you had to figure he would show up on this show in some capacity. Whether he would successfully, I guess, cash in or not was to be seen, but I figured he would show up in some form or fashion on this show and tease something with Danielson. And that's all it ended up being, was just a tease. Because as Christian was walking out there, Killswitch joined him from behind. He had Nick Wayne, and of course Mother Wayne was there too. They were walking down to the ring, and standing in their path was Jon Moxley, who was standing outside the ring, but he was right in front of the ring. Also, out from the crowd, Claudio returned, Wheeler Yuta returned, and Pac. And of course, the three of them specifically are trios champions, and the four men stood tall. They blocked Danielson, who was in the ring, smiling. And I saw this image of basically the BCC standing with Pac outside, facing off with the patriarchy, with Bryan Danielson in the ring with a smile on his face. I saw this entire image, and I thought in my head, I know exactly how this is going to go. Now, I will say it didn't go exactly how I thought it was going to go, because Christian did not end up cashing in his contract and winning the championship. I thought that was what was going to happen, but clearly it didn't. And to me, in my opinion, if it didn't happen on this show, it's probably not going to happen at all. But I digress. It continued from there because Christian left and his family left with him. And so the BCC, they all get in the ring. They're all hugging Danielson. Mox hugged Danielson. And the crowd, they're cheering for this. But they're also kind of quiet because even they could tell what was about to happen. They could tell something was going to happen. And I'm just waiting for it. I'm waiting to see who's going to deliver that first blow. How is this going to go? But you could see it coming. It was just a matter of exactly how it was going to go down. And it went down with Claudio hitting an uppercut on Danielson, which Danielson completely no-sold. He went down, but he was looking up at Claudio with a shocked look on his face. So then from behind, Mox comes over and he places a plastic bag over Danielson's head and face and is basically suffocating him. So here's the scene here. Mox is suffocating Danielson with this plastic bag. Claudio's out there. Marina Shafir, who we've seen pop up with Mox since he's returned a few weeks ago, and Wheeler Yuta is beside himself. He is in tears. He is screaming. He is pleading with Mox to stop here. Meanwhile, Pac is basically holding him back. So that's the scene. That's the layout here. So Danielson's laid out. Commentary's going crazy. Jim Ross, who joined at this point, is going absolutely berserk. So that's all going down here. And then they leave. Moxley, Claudio, Pac, and Marina Shafir all leave together through the crowd. And now out comes doctors and more referees and officials. They're all checking on Danielson. Wheeler Yuta is still out there with him, checking on him. They're pumping him up with oxygen. And then they carry him off. They don't put him on a stretcher. Apparently, AEW could not afford a stretcher for this show tonight because there was no stretcher here. There was no stretcher in the main event. Nothing. So this was a very awkward, very silly image of these men just lifting up Danielson and basically dragging him out of the arena. It wasn't technically dragging him, but it looked like that. It was close enough. It looked stupid. And that kind of made it a little goofy for me. I kind of laughed at that. But the turn itself, I thought, was bizarre. It didn't catch me off guard. It caught me off guard in that I didn't think I would see Jon Moxley try to murder Bryan Danielson. And the fans even chanted, "This is murder," when he placed the bag over his head and was choking him with it. I didn't expect that. I thought, what the hell? That came out of nowhere. But in the moment leading up to it with them coming out there, obviously at that point I saw it coming. Heading into this show, I didn't see this going down. I didn't see a scenario where you have a few of these guys, and Claudio and Yuta and Pac, they were out there with Bryan just weeks ago at All In London, standing side by side with him and his family as he won the championship. And now all these weeks later here, they're laying him out, and they're culprits here in trying to lay him out and basically murder him. Again, that's what happened. So that's fascinating. Jon Moxley, he's been back on TV for 2 weeks. He's been calling out Darby Allin, saying he wants to talk to him, and he's been talking in all these kinds of riddles. He's been walking around with Marina Shafir, who has been beating up people. I mean, he has too, but they've just been beating up people backstage. He's coming out to his New Japan Death Rider theme song, which is pretty good. And there's been question about whether or not he is still in the Blackpool Combat Club. And I guess the answer is technically yes, and maybe Bryan's the one out. Or this is the beginning of a brand new thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the name Shane McMahon, because ever since Jon Moxley came out on TV and told Tony Schiavone, this is no longer your company, or this is not your company anymore, that was immediately the key for everyone to log on and start throwing Shane McMahon's name out there. So I don't know if that's going to be the ultimate destination of this whole angle here and this whole thing. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. I don't know. I personally don't want it because I have no interest in seeing Shane McMahon on TV. I don't foresee any story that would make me desperately want to see Shane McMahon as the key figurehead of this entire thing, but we'll see how it plays out. But one thing I can say, I didn't see this coming. It caught me off guard, and I am very interested in seeing where this goes. Mox came back to TV a week or two ago, and it was very intriguing. And then this past week on the Go Home show, he cut another promo, and it was just kind of bleh. It didn't really make me all that excited to see where this would go, but I reserved complete judgment because I'm like, this is clearly the very, very beginning of whatever long-form story that they're telling here. So I'm going to be patient with it and let it play out. Well, it led to this, so we shall see what happens. I tell you what, it's got me very much so looking forward to Dynamite this upcoming Wednesday. This and the fallout of the Swerve Hangman stuff all has me very interested in seeing what's going to happen on Dynamite this upcoming week. So, mission accomplished in that regard. But you look at these things that have happened now, this and the main event, it's very difficult to go back and just look over all the other stuff that happened on this show, but there was good stuff that happened on this show. There was a fantastic match between Will Osprey and Pac for the International Championship. You have the names Will Osprey and Pac, you know it's going to be a fantastic match, and these two even over-exceeded any expectations that I had, so kudos to them. They had a tremendous match. To me, the finish was never in doubt, Osprey getting the win, but I thought the story that they were telling in this match, basically Pac refusing to be overlooked and not taken seriously and wanted to be presented at the level of Osprey. Pac took over a majority of this match. He was in control almost throughout the entire match, and it was Will Osprey who had to fight hard from underneath to make his comeback, and he did, and he won with the hidden blade. I love that Osprey can win his matches with any move. Just a few weeks ago, he won with the Tiger Driver. Of course, we've seen him win with the Os Cutter. We've seen him win with Stormbreaker. He has all these different moves, and Hidden Blade was the one that he chose to focus on to finish off his match here, and I thought that was great. And during the match, they were cutting backstage and were showing Ricochet looking at the monitor and watching this match. And then a little bit later on in the evening, Osprey was backstage getting interviewed, and he mentioned Ricochet, who magically appeared, and the two of them went face to face, and it was a little bit hostile. Ricochet felt a little disrespected by Osprey, and Osprey was basically telling him, go to Tony Khan, get you some matches, get a couple of wins under your belt, and then when you're ready, come find me, and the two of us can do this. So I'm pretty sure, I am almost positive, almost 90% positive. I'm 100% positive that about 90% of the reasoning behind Tony Khan signing Ricochet to this company is so he could do Ricochet versus Will Osprey as soon as possible. What happens to Ricochet once that match is over? I don't know. Probably going to just run it 3 or 4 more times afterwards, but I am fairly confident that one of the biggest factors behind Tony Khan wanting to sign Ricochet to a contract is because he wanted to do Ricochet versus Will Osprey on one of his promoted shows. So we're clearly going to get it very soon. It ain't going to take long for Ricochet to rack up some wins. Just throw his ass on Collision or Rampage, and he can rack up a couple of wins right there in 2 weeks flat. We can get this match by WrestleDream in October. I don't think we will, but it's very likely. We had a great opener on this show between MJF and Daniel Garcia. It's crazy coming out of this show. MJF, who's one of the biggest stars in this entire company, he was a non-factor coming out of this show. It's not like his name is being mentioned as one of the biggest highlights of the show, at least not for me, but that's fine. That just freed up space for other people and other stories to take precedent. This story was fine in and of itself, but I mentioned at the beginning of this review here that this match was built around two men wanting to break each other's necks, and we're doing things in this match with the intention of breaking the other's neck, hitting pile drivers and neck breakers and all the like, doing random things to try to break each other's necks. But at the end of the day, the goal was to win the match. that's something that Daniel Garcia could not quite comprehend because his emotions got the better of him. And in the end, that was his undoing. That was his downfall because MJF did score a win. It took a low blow behind the referee's back, but nonetheless, after that low blow, he got a jackknife cover on Daniel Garcia and got the win. But even though he won the match, Garcia came out the better of it because after the match, MJF, here's a guy who turned on Garcia in the first place. He dropped him on his head from the top turnbuckle all those weeks ago. He has talked about him and his mother for weeks. He has badmouthed him. And Daniel Garcia has been hell-bent on destroying this man for weeks now. So here we have MJF extending the hand for Danny to shake. And he does. He shakes hands with MJF. And MJF even raises his arm. But you knew this was complete BS. And more importantly, Garcia knew it as well. He was hip to MJF's game here. MJF tried to kick him low, but Garcia caught him, held his leg up, and then he kicked MJF in the dick. I found that to be funny. And then he drags MJF over to the turnbuckle in the corner, gets on the middle rope, and hits him with a pile driver. Just a regular pile driver, but nonetheless, it was still an avalanche pile driver, and MJF was laid out. Officials were not rushing out to stop Daniel Garcia from doing this, but eventually they did come out and they helped him out. Was there a stretcher here? I don't think there was a stretcher here during this part. Again, I think AEW didn't have it in the budget this tonight to have a stretcher on standby, but oh well. So I imagine that's going to write MJF off of TV for a little bit because it did that for Daniel Garcia. I don't see why it wouldn't do that for MJF. Now I know Garcia has contract issues and he has discussions with that right now, which apparently are still ongoing. And I figured that was a part of the reasoning behind the loss here for him, but he even still got the upper hand. And I looked and saw Ibu on Twitter. He posted, he's from Wrestling Purists, if you aren't informed or aware. He made a post about it and he talked about how there was a plan for Garcia to get a clean win, but due to his contract negotiations still ongoing, they decided to go with this finish. And they decided to lay out MJF the way they did because apparently he's going to be leaving and going to be filming a movie. So I don't know if it's an extended leave like Samoa Joe currently, who's off filming the new season of Twisted Metal, or if it's just going to be a few weeks. I'm not sure. But MJF is going to be apparently gone, which is why they did what they did here. But it made sense. MJF, I could not logically see him losing on 2 straight pay-per-views within 2 weeks of each other. So I figured he'd get the win here. But I'm glad they gave Garcia a little moment by having him stand tall in the end. So good for him. I mentioned the tag team title match with the Bucks and the BCC. The Continental Championship was on the line. Okada defended against Orange Cassidy, Mark Briscoe, and Konosuke Takeshita. Honestly, no disrespect to Orange Cassidy or Mark Briscoe. They were very entertaining in this match, but my attention was solely on seeing Okada and Takeshita in the ring together. And we got a little taste of it, a little tease of what we could expect in a future program, a proper one-on-one match between these two in the future. And I really hope we get it. But Okada, I don't think the finish was ever in doubt. He did win here. Good for him. One of the best matches on this entire show. I mean, the main event is going to be up for debate, obviously. Pac and Osprey was easily the best match of the night for me. But I think another strong contender was Willow Nightingale and Chris Statlander. They were in the unfortunate position of having to directly follow Osprey and Pac. And it's a hard spot to be in. But I thought they did a great job. And they had a Chicago street fight. And they beat the hell out of each other. To a much lower scale compared to the main event, this was also a match that is designed to blow off a feud. And these are two former friends who have turned to bitter enemies here. This was the proper way to blow off this rivalry, and I thought they killed it. They had the crowd in the palm of their hands. They were doing some crazy stuff out there with chairs and tables, even brought in some thumbtacks. One of the craziest spots I've ever seen with thumbtacks, where Chris Statlander was going for an axe kick, and Willow moved out of the way. So Chris basically did the splits in a pile of thumbtacks. It was brutal. This was a crazy match, and an even crazier finish with Chris Statlander hitting the Saturday Night Fever and then putting Willow in a submission, but basically choking her out with a steel chain and wrapping it around her throat and her face. And Willow, she didn't tap, but she basically submitted because she was done for, and it gave Chris Statlander the win. So great stuff here, and in my opinion was the better of the two women's matches on the show. The other women's match being the TBS Championship match between Mercedes Moné and Hikaru Shida. Not a bad match. I just enjoyed their match on free television a few weeks ago better. But this was still a good match. No Camille at ringside. She was banned. So it was just Mercedes and Shida. And I thought they had a really good match with a surprisingly clean finish from Mercedes. She cheated here and there, but nothing to any great degree. And it's not like she tremendously had a weak way of winning the match. I mean, she did, because her finisher is a weak move, but she basically won clean here. In fact, it was Shida who was on the verge of getting disqualified when she was teasing hitting Mercedes with a kendo stick, which made Shida, a former multiple-time women's world champion, look like an idiot for almost getting herself disqualified in a match where she is challenging for a championship. She right there is having a crisis of conscience whether or not to use a kendo stick right in front of the referee in a match where the only way for her to become champion is by pinfall or submission. And she was willing to disqualify herself. It's not even like Mercedes was doing anything at this point that would really justify this spot and justify the frustration and emotions of Shida to contemplate using this weapon. So I thought that was dumb. But Mercedes won with her bad finisher, but still got a clean victory. So good for her. And that about covers it as far as the actual pay-per-view is concerned. There was a bunch of trios matches on the pre-show. There was a Mariah May segment with Sky Blue, which led to a Queen Aminata appearance. Apparently her and Mariah are going to have a match on TV, so good for them. But yeah, that about covers it. I am very exhausted. Once again, AEW, a long show, and I respond with a long review. But a lot of stuff happened on this show, a lot of thoughts to process. So I thank you for having the patience with me to really talk through what we witnessed in that main event. I hope I did it justice, because it truly was unlike anything I have ever seen in a wrestling match before. And again, it's something I don't ever need to see at any point in the future. But isolated on this particular night, it was an anomaly that I can't believe I witnessed, but it is one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And once again, I must repeat, hats off to Hangman and Swerve. They're idiots for taking some of the spots they did in that match, especially the cinder block stuff, the staples, the unprotected chair shot to the head. I cannot get over that. It was stupid. But kudos to them for doing what they did in that match and telling their story that the way that they wanted to. Does that make AEW a modern day ECW or CZW? Again, real posts that I've seen. Yes, maybe no. I don't know. But you listen to that crowd reaction here tonight. The people seem to like it. And for the people thinking that stuff like this is going to lead to AEW's downfall, apparently they have a new TV rights deal coming up going to be announced any week now. So they are very likely going to be paid a lot of money to continue running on for several more years. So clearly, they must be doing something right. Despite low ratings, despite low ticket sales for houses, they must be doing something right to be getting a bag. So good on them. But I'm just here to call what I see on these shows. And from what I see here, this was a very good show, top to bottom. But that's about it for me. Thank you for listening. You know the drill. Hit the like button, subscribe, follow on Twitter/X at DerekJ Speaks. Till next time, take care. Whew. Unbelievable.